Now will you turn with me to the letter to the Romans, chapter 4, or rather chapter 3, verse 27, and then the whole of chapter 4. Romans chapter 3, verse 27, through the whole of chapter 4. Then what becomes of our boasting? It is excluded. On what principle? On the principle of works? No, but on the principle of faith. For we hold that a man is justified by faith, apart from works of the law. Or is God the God of Jews only? Is he not the God of Gentiles also? Yes, of Gentiles also, since God is one, and he will justify the circumcised on the ground of their faith, and the uncircumcised because of their faith. Do we then overthrow the law by this faith? By no means. On the contrary, we uphold the law. What then shall we say about Abraham, our forefather according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. Now to one who works, his wages are not reckoned as a gift, but as his due. And to one who does not work, but trusts him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is reckoned as righteousness. So also David pronounces a blessing upon the man to whom God reckons righteousness, apart from works. Blessed are those whose iniquities are forgiven, and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord will not reckon his sin. Is this blessing pronounced only upon the circumcised, or also upon the uncircumcised? We say that faith was reckoned to Abraham as righteousness. How then was it reckoned to him? Was it before or after he had been circumcised? It was not after, but before he was circumcised. He received circumcision as a sign or seal of the righteousness which he had by faith while he was still uncircumcised. The purpose was to make him the father of all who believe, without being circumcised, and who thus have righteousness reckoned to them. And likewise the father of the circumcised, who are not merely circumcised, but also follow the example of the faith which our father Abraham had before he was circumcised. The promise to Abraham and his descendants that they should inherit the world did not come through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. If it is the adherents of the law who are to be the heirs, faith is null and the promise is void, for the law brings wrath. But where there is no law, there is no transgression. That is why it depends on faith, in order that the promise may rest on grace and be guaranteed to all his descendants, not only to the adherents of the law, but also to those who share the faith of Abraham. For he is the father of us all, as it is written, I have made you the father of many nations. In the presence of the God in whom he believed, who gives life to the dead and calls into existence the things that do not exist. In hope, he believed against hope, that he should become the father of many nations, as he had been told, so shall your descendants be. He did not weaken in faith when he considered his own body, which was as good as dead, because he was about 100 years old, or when he considered the barrenness of Sarah's womb. No distrust made him waver concerning the promise of God, but he grew strong in his faith as he gave glory to God, fully convinced that God was able to do what he had promised. That is why his faith was reckoned to him as righteousness. But the words, "it was reckoned to him," were written not for his sake alone, but for ours also. It will be reckoned to us who believe in him that raised from the dead Jesus our Lord, who was put to death for our trespasses and raised for our justification. Let us pray. Eternal God, thou art almighty, thou art the God who is able to give life to the dead and to bring into being things that do not exist. And we thank thee for the miraculous power that thou hast revealed from time to time in the affairs of men. And we ask, O God, that the study this morning may stimulate our faith, may make us strong to believe that thou art able to do everything thou hast promised. We thank thee that when we have such a faith in thy holy word, we have security. We have the guarantee. We have that certain knowledge that everything is going to be all right, because thou hast promised one day to banish evil and to establish thy kingdom of good. Lord, we believe, help thou our unbelief. Lord, we have faith, and yet so little. Grant us great faith, faith that laughs at impossibilities and cries, "It shall be done." Faith that believes that thou art able to do anything, that asks the question, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" and answers, "No, nothing." Lord, we are so bowed down from time to time with problems and difficulties, with the weight of our circumstances, that we tend to be discouraged and skeptical as to whether anything can happen. And yet, O Lord, again and again thou hast surprised us and shown us that thou art a mighty God, that thy hand is not shortened, that thou art not able to save. And we pray, O God, that thou wilt help everyone in this congregation this morning to have a faith, perhaps just a little faith in a big God, but a faith that thou art able to do everything thou hast said. And we pray that this may come as we study the life of thy servant Abraham. We pray that though he is dead, yet he may speak to us, for he is in fact living unto thee. For thou art the God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob. Thou art still their God, because they are living unto thee. We pray that we may learn what it is to be true sons of Abraham, as well as sons of thyself. We ask it in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. About 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, a man asked a question which is the most important question you can ever ask in life. And the question was this, and the man was a man called Job, who was going through a lot of suffering. And this was his question: how can men be justified with God? Or to put it in simple English, how can a man get into God's good books? How can a man be sure of getting to heaven? How can I be sure that I'm right with God? Now, if you went round this community and stopped people in the street and simply said, "How do you think you can be sure of getting to heaven?" you would get a variety of answers. Broadly speaking, you'd get two sorts of answer. One answer would say by being good. The other answer would say by being religious. The people who think that you get right with God by being good would tell you, well, don't do anybody any harm. Try and help your neighbors when they're in trouble. Do your best. Do a good deed every day if you can, if not more. This kind of answer, leave the world a little better than you find it. Heaven helps those who help themselves. All sorts of popular phrases come to mind. Basically, the answer they give is, be good, and you will get right with God and get to heaven. You will get in God's good books. You will be justified in God's sight, though they wouldn't use that word. On the other hand, there's another group of people that tell you the answer is not be good, but be religious. Go to church, get baptized or confirmed, become a member, take the sacrament of the Lord's Supper, be regular in your attendance, give your money, and so on and so forth. And then there is a third group of people that says you've got to do both those. You've got to be good and be religious. And if you live a good life and be religious, then you stand the best chance of all. Now, all those answers are wrong. And you can prove them to be wrong by asking the people who give you the answer, are you sure that you're right with God? Are you sure that you're going to heaven? Are you sure that you're in God's good books? And you'll find that not one of them is sure. And yet here in this chapter we are told that you can have a guarantee, that you can be sure that you're right with God, that you can be sure you're going to heaven. Now, if you tell a person to be good, they'll never be sure, because they'll never be sure that they're good enough. That's the difficulty. If you tell a person to be religious to get right with God, they can never be sure, because they never know whether they've been religious enough, whether they've given enough time or money and the rest of it to God, whether they've gone through all the sacraments and the ordinances and the rites in the right way and with the right spirit. These things don't make people sure. And all the people who are trying to be good and trying to be religious, or trying to be both together, you will find that they lack assurance. Of course they lack it, because these are not the ways to get right with God. The real answer to the question of Job, how can a man be justified with God? How can he get right with God? How can he be sure that when he dies he will not be judged but will go to be with heaven? The answer is only one word: faith. Faith. If you have faith, you're right with God. That means that you can have faith without being good. You can have faith without being religious. If you simply have faith, that very moment you can be sure that you're right with God. Now that's our subject for this morning. Let me just write a few words down. You know that I'm always telling you, when you read a passage, to look for the key words, to look for the words that occur most often. And we'll do this with the passage I read to you. The word that occurs most often, in fact 16 times, is this little word faith. That's our subject for this morning. Faith, what it is, what it does. The next word that occurs next most frequently, it occurs in fact 11 times, is a little word, reckoned. And then there's another word that occurs 8 times. And these are the most frequently occurring words. And the word that occurs 8 times is a rather longer word, righteousness. Now that's the theme of this whole passage. It occurs in every paragraph of it. It is quite simply that faith is reckoned as righteousness. Righteousness is that perfection, that goodness that you need if you're going to get right with God. Now then, the whole lesson this morning is this. If you've got faith, God will spell it that way. If you've got faith, God will reckon it as that. And the key to it lies in this middle word. What does reckon mean? It means to place to the credit side of your account. It's a word from the commercial world in the ancient days. You've got a bank balance. Are you in the red or in the black? To reckon is to have something put down against your account, but to have it put on the credit side. So let's turn over and look at this. Here's your account. And you have an account with God. God keeps account books. And he calls every man to give account of himself one day in the judgment. There is a reckoning with God. There is a settling of your account with God. You can settle it right now through faith. If you don't, you will settle it then in another way. It has its debit side and its credit side. Down on this side goes all that. It is down in your account against you. Everything you've done, let's make it plural because it's not just once, it's many, many times. If you've just sinned once a day for 30 years, there are 10,000 things on your debit account. Now you can't just put all the good things that you've done on that side and hope that in fact they will be more than this, and on balance you might just scrape through. Some people think that good things cancel out bad things. As long as there's anything on that side, then you're finished. In God's sight, you've got a debit balance, and that's it. So that in fact, According to Romans, there's nothing on that side and everything on this side in your account. There is in fact no one who does good, no, not one. Therefore there's no one who has anything to put on that side, but everyone has an awful lot to put on this side. Because in fact there's nothing good you've done that God didn't enable you to do. Anything good in your life was God's work in you, His Spirit striving with you. The only thing that you can claim complete credit for yourself are these things. And when God looks at what you yourself have done, apart from Him, the only thing you've done goes on this side. Now, how are we ever going to get that account balanced? The answer is very simple. The moment I have faith, two things happen. First of all, God puts it on the credit side and reckons that that will do instead of perfect righteousness. He will reckon faith as if it were a perfectly good life. The moment you believe, God reckons that you've lived a perfect life, and that faith goes down, reckoned, credited to your account as righteousness. Something else happens. It still wouldn't balance upright. The other thing that God does, according to this chapter, is He does not reckon your sin. In other words, the moment I believe, that is covered, and blessed is the man to whom the Lord does not reckon, credit sin to his account. And He puts faith in that column, only He spells it Righteousness. That's how God spells faith when He writes it down that side. So that in fact the moment I believe, that very moment the account is squared. The account is cleared. There's nothing on the debit side that's covered. It is not reckoned. Everything bad I have ever done and everything bad I am going to do is not reckoned. It's not put down on my account. It's covered. It's wiped out. It's clean. And God has put them behind His back and remembers them no more. It's finished. That's clean. And on the other side, He's put down my faith, and that is reckoned in place of a perfectly righteous life. Now, not goodness, not religion, just faith. Now let's look at the passage and see how all this worked out. That's just given you the theme of the passage. We begin in verse 27, and the end of chapter 3, I have given the title, The Principle of Faith. This is the basic principle. It is an entirely new way to be right with God. It's so simple that people don't like it. People would much rather be told to try and be good. People would be much rather be told to try and be religious and join the church and do this, that, and the other. It's so simple that anybody, whether they are good or bad, religious or not religious, anybody could come this way to God and be right with Him just by believing. It's simple. That's the basic principle. It's the principle behind all Christianity. One word sums up being a Christian: faith. Well, now this means that if that's the way, there's no boasting. Trouble is, human nature loves to boast. We love to boast of how many things we've done, of how religious we are. We love to think ourselves as better than others. And I'm afraid pride comes in along with good works and with religion. If you don't believe this, then ask yourself honestly, when I have done a good deed, when I have helped someone else, when I've done something really good, did I have any thought at all about what a good person I am? Well, if you didn't, then congratulations. But there's a good deal of little Jack Horner in us. Little Jack Horner sat in his corner eating his Christmas pie, puts in his thumb and pulls out a plum and says, "What a good boy am I." That's precisely what we're always doing. Whether we say it or not, we tend to think it. Because I go every Sunday to church and my neighbor just mows his grass on Sunday morning, I am somehow better than he is. Because I'm working in the Red Cross or the Women's Voluntary Service or visiting the elderly folk, taking them to hospital, and my neighbors never use the car except to go to the seaside and enjoy themselves, I am a little better than they are. Now you see, the principle of faith cuts boasting right out. You can't boast if that's the way you've got right with God. What is there to boast about? You haven't done any good deeds to get right with God. You haven't done any religion to get right with God. All you've done is simply believe that God will accept you like that. So you've got nothing to boast about at all. You're no better than anyone else. That's why a true Christian never thinks of himself as any better than anyone else. Because the only thing he had to do was have faith. And there's nothing to boast about in that. Because even the faith itself didn't save him. Faith only coupled him up to the power that did save him. That's all. It was all of God. If it's only faith that God asks of you, then you'll never be able to boast that you're better than anyone else. It is not excluded, this boasting, on the grounds of works. We have already shown that nobody's good deeds are enough to get right with God. But that's not what cuts out the boasting. To tell people that all the good things they've ever done are not enough, that's not what cuts out the boasting. What cuts out the boasting is that none of those good deeds are any help to them at all. Even the few they achieved are no use. They're not in the picture. And therefore, no one can ever boast. So now he makes two simple statements. And the first statement is this. We hold, verse 28, this is the Christian truth, we hold that a man is right with God, justified before God, justified by faith, apart from keeping the commandments, apart from good deeds, apart from works of the law. Do you know, frankly, I find this is the hardest thing to get across to people. It really is. That none of their good works are any use to them at all. That if they're ever to get right with God, it is not because they've never done anybody any harm and have tried to do good. It is something entirely different. But I find that the hardest thing of all. When a woman said to me, do you mean to tell me that all the good things I've ever done won't get me any nearer heaven? I had to say yes. She's never spoken to me since. It is the hardest thing to say to people that in fact we are justified before God altogether apart from doing anything He's told us to do. Altogether apart from keeping the 10 or the 613 commandments in the Old Testament. It's quite apart from that. That is why Luther, when he translated this in the German, put an extra little word in this verse that wasn't there in the original. And he's been greatly criticized for putting it in, but he was really giving the sense if he didn't give the exact translation. When Luther translated it, he said, we hold that a man is justified by faith alone, apart from works of the law. And those who want to mix faith and works, who say that you're saved by believing and doing good, and it's not just Roman Catholics who are saying that, many Protestants are saying that. A recent book published by the Baptist Press in London says that we are saved by faith plus works. So a lot of people are saying this. They don't like that word alone. And while it's true that Paul didn't write it, it's what Paul meant. Apart from good works, apart from all the good things you do, it has nothing whatever to do with that. You may never have done a good deed in your life. You can get right with God. You may have done a good deed every day of your life and kept it up after you left the Scouts. You still get right with God apart from that. It's apart from works of the law. Therefore, it doesn't really matter whether you're a Jew or a Gentile. There is only one God and there's only one way to get right with Him. It is no longer a matter of race. If it's apart from works of the law, it's equal terms for Jew and Gentile. God is the God of both. There are neither grandchildren nor stepchildren in God's family. Think through the implications of that and you'll realize that there is no back door into God's family. There is the door of faith. And a Jew must use that door and a Gentile must use that door. A British person must use that door, an American must use that door, an African must use that door. It does not matter what your race, what your blood, what your background may be. There is only one door, and that's the door of faith. Jew and Gentile, one God. Now at this point, of course, the Jews in Paul's congregation were getting very hot under the collar. And one of them would undoubtedly want to ask the question, you're sweeping aside the law of God. The law that he gave Moses, the law of God, you're just wiping it out in one fell swoop if it doesn't matter. And if you can get right with God without the law, aren't you destroying the law, overthrowing it? And Paul's answer is in a sentence, no. We are upholding it. Now, he doesn't explain how at this point. He does later in the letter, and we'll come to it. But let me just give you 3 reasons at the moment why, in fact, the principle of faith upholds the law. First fact, Christ was born under the law and perfectly kept it, and our faith is in someone who upheld the law. That's reason number 1. Reason number 2, when Christ died, he died to pay the penalty of the law. Therefore, my faith in his death is faith in the penalty of the law. Reason number 3, when I have faith, I am so brought into a living relationship to Christ that he fills my heart with his love, and that love fulfills the law anyway. And the result will be that I keep the 10 Commandments even though I have nothing to do with the law anymore. Because if I love someone, I don't kill them, I don't steal from them, I don't commit adultery, I don't bear false witness, I don't covet what they have if I love them. So that when you really work it out, far from throwing the law out, it puts the law right in the middle again and upholds it. The only thing it does do, it simply says that you'll never get to heaven by keeping it. That's the only thing the gospel says about the law that puts it out. But then it brings it back in by saying Christ fulfilled the law and my faith is in him. And when I am in him, I will fulfill the law through my love. So that in fact we are establishing the law. See, there are 2 ways of establishing the law. One is by punishing people when they break it. The other is by writing that law on their heart so that they will want to keep it. And that is in fact what faith does. When you really have faith, you want to keep the law. Not because you'll be punished if you don't, but because you love the Lord who gave it and you want to do his will. So that in fact the law is not cancelled. Now we move on to the second part. In chapter 4, Paul speaks about one man, Abraham, and he speaks about him again and again and again. How many times is the name used? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 times he mentions this man Abraham. I remember standing and looking at Abraham's grave. It's a moving moment. You feel, in a sense, very near to the real human being called Abraham when you stand and look at his grave in the cave of Machpelah. It's still there, and it's still a genuine site, and it's one of the most genuine sites in the Middle East. And yet Abraham is not dead. He's alive as Abraham, and God is the God of Abraham this morning. Now, why should we look at Abraham? Well, here are 4 reasons. First, because so far faith is an abstract truth. And it's much easier to understand it when you see it operating in someone's life. Much easier to understand a thing when you can see it in someone's life. It becomes concrete instead of abstract. It's so easy to talk generally about faith. What is it? Then my answer is, look at Abraham and study his life and you'll see faith. It helps us to understand it. Secondly, Abraham was held in deep respect by all Jews. He was the founder and the pattern for their race. And therefore to look at Abraham would convince a Jew of the truth. And he's going to say, how did Abraham get right with God? The one who started the Jewish race, your forefather, how did he get right with God? Thirdly, it is to show that there's nothing really new about faith. It's as old as Abraham. In fact, it's older still. Faith has been the principle on which men have got right with God ever since the beginning. And fourth, this ties together the Old and the New Testament in a proper way. They are both books of faith. And in fact, in Hebrews 11, that matchless chapter, you get a list of people, examples of faith, and every one of them is from the Old Testament. Have you noticed that? Hebrews chapter 11, it says, by faith, Abel, by faith, Enoch, By faith Noah, by faith Abraham, by faith Moses, by faith Gideon, by faith Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel. All those people are from the Old Testament, and they all live by faith. There's nothing new about faith. The Old Testament is the story of people who live by faith, not works. Well, then let's look at Abraham. Abraham was a man who was absolutely right with God. If I can put it reverently, they were like that. God and Abraham were friends. Abraham was called the friend of God. I can think of no lovelier relationship to have with God than that. Have you got anywhere near that? Do you understand what it is to be the friend of God? To say God is my friend. I am a friend of His. Jesus said to His disciples, "You are my friends." I think that's the loveliest relationship you could ever have with your Creator. Abraham was called the friend of God. Now, how did he get that way? How did he, an ordinary man, get right with God? It was not because he was a good man, because he wasn't. He was a deceitful man. And in fact, if you read the story of Abraham, he wasn't at all good. He passed his wife off as his sister, and even got her into the position where somebody else ran off with her to make her his wife. And he did it purely because he was frightened for his own safety, and he told lies to people about his own wife and said, "She's my sister." He was a deceitful man, and yet he was God's friend. Was it because he was very religious? The answer is he didn't really get very religious till the end of his life. It wasn't that. Was it because he did more good things than bad, or because he did the best that he could? No. Was it because he did lots of good works? No, the answer is he did good works later in his life, but not at the beginning. How did he originally get right with God? How did he become a friend of God? The answer is very simple. One night he stood at the door of his tent. And as he stood, he looked up to the starry heavens, and he looked at the multitude of those twinkling lights. 6,000 of them he could see. He didn't know then, as science has revealed, that there are in fact thousands upon thousands upon thousands. But as he looked up at the stars, God said something to him and said, "Abraham, your descendants are going to be as many as those stars." And Abraham believed it. That's all. He didn't do anything good. He didn't do anything religious. He just stood there and he believed it. Now this was incredible, because he didn't even have one family, one son, not one baby had been given to him. Sarah had been barren all their married life. Not a child had she given him. And now she was way, way past the age of childbearing. And he was 100 years old, and he was as good as dead as far as his body went. And yet, as he stood at that tent door, he believed that he'd have as many sons as there were stars in the sky. And that night, God took Abraham's account. He wiped out the deceitfulness. He wiped out all his sins. That was not reckoned anymore. But that night, God wrote that word on the credit side of Abraham's account. It was reckoned to him in place of righteousness. Now that's how Abraham became a friend of God, and that's how anybody else will ever become a friend of God. There's only one way to become a friend of God, and that's to believe that He can do what He says. That's all. When God makes a promise, He's able to keep it, because He's the God Almighty. We'll come back to that in a moment. Notice that there was no right living, no right acting, no right standing. It was simply that Abraham believed. It doesn't even say that faith is righteousness. Never think that faith is a good work and that faith is righteousness. It simply says that God accepted faith instead of righteousness. Instead of trying to live a good life, instead of trying to live up to God's standards, God accepted faith instead of that and wrote it down. You see, if you're going to get to heaven by doing good deeds, then frankly, if you do get to heaven that way, which you won't, it would not be grace, it would be wages. You'd have earned it. God would have to give it to you. But in fact, his righteousness is a free gift. It's not wages. It's not something you can earn. It's not something you deserve. It's not something you've worked for. It's something he's given to you quite freely. And the moment you believe, he gives it to you absolutely freely. Now, the other side to this is, of course, precisely this. If I'm going to settle my account with heaven, not only does faith need to be credited to my account instead of good living as righteousness, but those things, the other side, I've already mentioned this, let's go back to it. If Abraham makes it quite clear that faith can be accepted by God instead of righteousness, that he'll credit it to your account of righteousness, there's still that other side to be dealt with, and here Paul quotes from David from Psalm 32. And he said, David knew all about this. Do you know that in one single act, David broke the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th commandments? He killed Uriah the Hittite. He committed adultery with Bathsheba, his wife. He stole her to get her. He bore false witness against Uriah. He had coveted Uriah's wife. In one single act, King David, that great man, broke 5 out of 10 commandments, and he sought the mercy of the Lord. The Lord forgave him, and the Lord didn't reckon his sin. The Lord didn't put it down in the account. And David, writing a psalm, said this, Blessed, or oh how happy is the man whose iniquities are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Happy is the man against whom the Lord will not reckon, credit, account with sins. Now you see, if God is prepared not to reckon that, and to reckon that as righteousness, your account is absolutely squared. Your account is straight. You've had one side blotted out and one side filled up. And that happened the day you believed. And that's from the life of Abraham and the life of David, proved from the Old Testament, proved from the Word of God, proved from the Scripture, that that's how God will reckon your account. Reckon it up. Doesn't need a computer to do that. He simply reckons up. Sin is covered. Faith will do instead of righteousness. Now then, let's go a step further. This blessing from Psalm 32 of not reckoning sin, not writing it down in the books, surely that's a Jewish psalm, and surely it was written for Jews, for the circumcised. What about poor old me? I'm not a Jew. I don't belong to that people. Psalm 32 was not written directly for me. It's a psalm for the Jews. Could I have that blessing of having my sins not reckoned to my account? Well, Paul says, let's go back to Abraham. When was Abraham justified in God's sight? Before or after he'd been circumcised? And the answer is 14 years before. It wasn't that rite, that ceremonial, that ritual that made him justified. He believed long before he was circumcised. Therefore, circumcision doesn't enter the picture. It is a rite, an ordinance, which was given afterwards to seal what was already true. It was a badge, a brand given to Abraham to show that he was right with God. It was not given before. Can I here be a Baptist for a moment? But I believe in being so, I'm being just a New Testament Christian. Baptism should not come before faith for the same reason, that people will tend to think that because they've been christened, somehow they're right with God. It is a seal on someone's faith, and it should come afterwards, as it did with Abraham. If circumcision had come before, he might have said, I'm circumcised, I'm right with God, I belong to God. But it didn't. It came afterwards to seal his faith. It was the faith that got him right with God. Baptism doesn't save anybody. Christening doesn't save anybody. Confirmation doesn't save anybody. All these things should come after faith, not before. They are to seal And we should follow Abraham because we're sons of Abraham. We should believe first and then be baptized. And christening or baptizing people before they believe puts the whole thing back to front and gives them a false security in a rite or a ritual or a ceremony that in fact they have no right to possess. There'll be plenty of christened people in hell. It is faith that gets the account squared, not any ordinance or sacrament or rite. These come as the seal and sign of what has already been put right in faith. Well, now this is why Abraham is now the father of those who are circumcised, those who are not. If a man has that seal but believes, he is a son of Abraham. If a man hasn't that seal but believes, he's a son of Abraham. If a man has been baptized but doesn't believe, he's lost. He's not right with God. If a man has believed but not been baptized, he is right with God. It's as simple as that. It is the faith that makes me a son of Abraham. So it's not a question of my race, Jew or Gentile. It's not a question of any rite, circumcision or uncircumcision. And nor, thirdly, is it a question of religion. We now come to the third part this morning. First, the principle of getting right with God now is faith. Second, the pronouncement upon those who have faith is that they are not only right with God, they have their sins not reckoned. They are forgiven. Their iniquities are covered. Their sins are taken away and blotted out, thrown into the deepest sea, removed as far as the east is from the west. Forgiveness is the other side of faith. Now we come to a third thing. Abraham received a promise. And the promise was that his family would inherit the world, and that he would be the father of many nations. Now you just think that through. How can one man be the father of many nationalities? How can a Jew be a father of an American, or a British, or a Russian, or an Indian, or a Chinaman, or an African? How can a Jew become a father of many nations? That's the promise. Your family will be of many nationalities, Abraham, and those many nationalities will inherit the world. Through you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Now, what a promise. And it was an incredible promise. It was given to Abraham together with a new name. His name originally was Abram. Do you know what the difference means? His name was A-B-R-A-M, Abram. But you know, that was changed, and it was changed to this, Abraham. And that little extra bit means nations, nations. Abram, I'm going to make you a father of many nationalities, so we'll give you a new name with the word nations in it. Abraham. And he's been known as Abraham ever since, the father of nations. So that with the promise was given this new name that enshrined the promise within it. Now the first thing that Paul says in this section, in verses 13 to 15, is this. This promise was nothing to do with the law. In fact, the Old Testament law wasn't given till 400 years later. And the law didn't even fulfill the promise because nobody could keep it. It simply brought punishment, not blessing. It simply pushed people out of God's blessing. It never brought them in. It brought wrath upon them. Indeed, people were better off without it, because where there's no law, there's no transgression of the law. And in fact, it's nothing to do with the law. The promise came before the law, and it never caught up with it. And the law has nothing to do with the promise. But now he comes on to this important point. Abraham had certain physical descendants. He also has many spiritual descendants. There are two sorts of sons of Abraham. There are those who have his blood in them, and there are those who don't. But both, again, are his sons by sharing his faith, not by sharing his blood. Some of his physical children share his faith, and they belong to the Lord. Some of his spiritual children, all of his spiritual children share his faith, and they belong too. And therefore, some of you, if not all of you, I hope, but most of you at least, are Abraham's family. And look what nationalities we've got present this morning. And we're all his family. And we're all going to inherit the world. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. The world is going to be ours. And all because we're the sons of Abraham. And it doesn't matter what your nationality is. If you share his faith, you share the promise. You're going to inherit the world because you're his family. Now you realize that there are, though he could only see 6,000 stars that night he stood outside the tent, there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of sons of Abraham. What a family he's got. Now at this point, Paul has to go back to Abraham's faith and underline what an amazing faith it was. It was absolutely against all scientific pronouncements of his day. Here was his faith. He believed in a God who could create and a God who could recreate. A God who could bring things into being that did not exist, and a God who could give life to the dead. That was Abraham's faith in a mighty God, and it showed at 2 points in his life. First of all, he believed in a God who could bring something out of nothing, things that do not exist into being. He was an old man. He was 100 years old. His wife was not far behind him, and they had no children. Now, all scientific knowledge of that day and of our day would say absolutely definitely, Abraham, afraid you'll have to adopt or some other way of having a child, but you and your wife cannot possibly have a son. But Abraham said, my case is not hopeless. And against human hope, he had divine hope. And he never doubted that he'd have a boy of his own. Now think of the faith of that. People think that faith is more difficult in a modern scientific age, when science says this can't happen and that can't happen. It was just as difficult for Abraham. Anybody in his day would have said it's out of the question for you to have a baby. Out of the question, utterly impossible. But Abraham didn't think so. Abraham believed in a God who can work miracles, a God who can bring something into being that does not exist, a God who could create within his wife's womb a boy. And he believed it. The other side of his faith, of course, was that God is able to raise the dead. There came a day when the boy arrived. Mind you, Sarah laughed at the possibility. Sarah didn't share Abraham's faith at the beginning. She laughed at the idea. Herself having a boy at her age. Why, it was ridiculous. But she had the boy. And some years later, when the boy was perhaps 12 years of age, God said to Abraham, you've still only got one boy, haven't you? And he is the apple of your eye, and you love him. Do you believe that from him are going to come that family like the stars? Well, I want you to take that boy, and I want you to kill him. I want you to show that you love me more than him. I want you to show that the dearest thing you have, you are prepared to sacrifice to me. Get you up into a mountain that I show you. Offer the boy as a sacrifice to me. And Abraham set off to do it. Now, do you know why he was able to go through with that? It was literally cutting off his only hope of posterity, the only hope of having a family, of having descendants. Do you know why he did it? The Bible tells us that he believed that after he'd killed Isaac, God would raise him from the dead. He believed in a God who could bring his boy back to life. Now, he'd never seen that done. He'd never known a resurrection from the dead. But he believed that God was able to do that, and that if God had promised that through Isaac there would be descendants, that even if he killed Isaac, God was still able to do what he'd promised, and would raise Isaac from the dead. That was his faith. That's why he went through with it. And he made his boy carry that wood up the hill, and then he laid the wood on the altar, and the boy said, but what are you going to sacrifice? And Abraham then said, I've got to sacrifice you, son. And he bound his own boy and laid him on the altar. Dreadful moment. But Abraham believed that that boy would be given back to him as he'd been given miraculously in the first place. So Abraham believed in the miracle of his birth and in the miracle of his resurrection. And these are the two miracles of that greater beloved Son, Jesus, the Son of God. And God allowed Jesus to carry the wood for his own execution up the very same hill where Isaac went up. And God gave his Son back by resurrection from the dead, as God had created that Son in the womb of a virgin 33 years previously. You see the pattern. Abraham believed in the same God that we are called to believe in. He believed in a God who can bring a birth against scientific impossibilities. He believed in a God who can raise the dead. And our faith is in a God who caused Jesus to be born and brought him back from the dead. Abraham had the same faith we have. He believed in a God who could do those two things. And the virgin birth and the resurrection of Christ are the two pivots of our faith. And the birth of Isaac and the resurrection of Isaac were the two pivots of Abraham's faith. And against all human hope, he was absolutely sure, convinced. Verse 21 is the best definition of faith in the whole Bible. Fully convinced that God was able to do what he promised. That's faith. And a man who is fully convinced that God is able to do what he promises is a man who's right with God. A man who's got his sins not reckoned, blotted out and covered. And a man who's got faith written down in the righteousness column. And the account is settled. He is righteous in God's sight. He's accepted. Because this story of Abraham was not written for his sake alone. It was not written for biographical or historical interest. It was written for you. Because if you ever get right with God, it will be on exactly the same terms as Abraham got right with God. He got right with God through faith. The only difference is this. Abraham had to believe in something that God was going to do in the future that he had not seen. We have to believe in something that God did in the past that we've not seen. But it's the same God. And our faith is to be rooted in this. Faith in what? Many people have faith. Most people have faith either in themselves or someone else or something else. Most people have faith. But faith in what? Let me just run through what we've said. The first paragraph this morning tells us, not faith in your race, either Jew or Gentile, British or African. Don't think because you're born in Britain, in a so-called Christian country, that you're right with God. You're not. Nor is it to put your trust in religious rites, baptism, confirmation, or anything else. These are meant to be seals of a faith that already exists. They cannot do anything of themselves. You don't seal a document until it's written. And a seal only comes in to make genuine what is already there. So neither your race, Jew or Gentile, nor rites, circumcised or uncircumcised, nor religion, Abraham's physical children or his spiritual children. It's not adherence to the law that will get right with God. It's those who believe. But believe in what? Well, believe in the God who brings into being things that do not exist and raises the dead. Believe in a God who did this in Jesus Christ. Believe in a God who formed Jesus Christ in the womb of Mary and raised him from the tomb. And from the womb to the tomb we see the mighty power of God. And we see the almighty miracle working energy of an almighty creator recreating what he creates. And in between the womb and the tomb we see something else. We see a cross. And that cross is an essential part of the story. Our faith is rooted and grounded in a Savior who was born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, and the third day rose again. These are the pivots of our faith. And it is to believe that all that was for your justification, that he died and was delivered up for our sins and was raised that we might be put right with God. That's the final sentence in chapter 4. It is an introduction to and a summary of chapters 5 and 6. Having settled in our minds what faith is, that it is to be fully convinced that God is able to do what he promises, now we go on next Sunday morning to ask, but faith in what? Faith in whom? The answer is faith in the Lord Jesus Christ and in his death and resurrection, in his being delivered up for our transgressions, and in his being raised for our justification. Next Sunday morning we'll go on to explore more fully the implications of the death and resurrection of Christ.